Okay. So how many people were in the last workshop? Just one. Okay. We're going to do one thing that's similar, and we're going to do something that's a lot different than what we did in the last workshop. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. So my name is Dustin Washington, and I'm an anti-racist educator and anti-racist community organizer who I live in Seattle and do a lot of work around the prison industrial complex and seeing the prison industrial complex as a form of modern-day slavery. I also do a lot of work in terms of developing anti-racist leadership of students through a project that we have called Freedom School. And out of the Freedom Schools, there's a group called Youth Undoing Institutional Racism that are doing a lot of phenomenal organizing across the country around the school-to-prison pipeline and the prison industrial complex. And our organization, the People's Institute, we do 2.5-day Undoing Racism trainings / community organizing trainings that really helps all of us to get a common and collective analysis around the impact of race and racism, poverty, and how systems can serve as feet of oppression in this country. And the fundamental hope out of the workshop is not just that we all get some new knowledge, that's important, but that we also get a set of tools that helps us to become more effective anti-racist organizers. So what we're going to do is we're going to show a brief clip of a film, then we're going to come back and we're going to have an exercise, and we're going to show a film that really looks at, it's a young man by the name of Kimani Carter, who's a part of an organization called the Black Prisoners Caucus in Washington State, and he's currently incarcerated. And the Black Prisoners Caucus is a organizing organization inside of the prison. And while their name is the Black Prisoners Caucus, there's also Native American men that are involved. There are Latino men, Asian men, and believe it or not, there are former Aryan Nation skinheads who are trying to change their worldview that are involved as well. And so we're going to show him talking a little bit about juvenile justice, and we're going to pivot from that to looking at poverty, because we all understand that the majority of people in our prison system in the United States are poor and disproportionately people of color. I want to ask all the folks that, because come up to the front of the room, because we're going to do this workshop style. So can y'all, even those in the back, if you can come up even further, that would be better. That's fine. That's fine. And there's some seats right up in the front, too. Okay, so we're going to, can you dim the lights a little bit for us, like we did last time? So we're going to watch this film, come back, and we're going to look at this critical question: why are people poor?
For those who don't know, my name's Kimani Carter, and I'm currently serving a life sentence for a gang-related drive-by that happened 9 years ago. My victim was innocent. He was also a student who was attending college. His name was Corey Pittman. At this time, I would like to apologize to the Pittman family, because only now have I begun to understand that the enjoyment of life once taken away can never be replaced. And I'm sorry. I first became a gang member when I was around 11 years old. Through my gang involvement brought me an extensive juvenile history. Everything from burglary to robbery, theft of motor vehicles, possession of narcotics, escape, all before my 16th birthday. And the reason that I'm telling you all this is because my history is the life of a lot of kids out there in our community. And my reality as a young man doing from prison will be their future if we don't start creating better ways of dealing with our children. As a child, I spent years and years in my childhood locked up in our juvenile system. And so have a lot of other adults locked up in our prison system. And that's because a lot of the problems that young troubled kids have never get addressed. In the United States, we got countless amount of children that are living with child abuse, sexual assault, neglect, abandonment, suffering from bipolar disorder, ADD, ADHD, depression. There isn't any programs. There isn't any classes, and there isn't any counselors that teaches a child how to deal with these traumatic events or the best way to deal with these disorders. And that's because our justice system spends all their resources on punishing them for their crimes instead of trying to help them through their mistakes. If you understand that a child has lived a rough and damaging childhood, that in itself should play a major role in how a child is sentenced and in choosing a method in how a child is rehabilitated. Because the only way you're going to make rehabilitation effective for a child is by understanding the needs of that individual. Because a lot of our children are in the streets suffering mentally. And when they make these mistakes, they're being punished without being offered any alternatives. So they begin to understand the consequences, but what they don't understand is what they can do different. Because you can't possibly think just telling a child to go to school is going to make all the problems in their life go away. Because the truth of the matter is, just being able to survive out here in the streets is more important than English. And being able to feed yourself is way more important than math. And that's sad. But unfortunately, everybody's not blessed with a supportive family and a safe and stable environment. And when you got laws in place that prevents a child from working more than 26 hours a week and job requirements that state that you need at least 3 to 5 years experience plus a high school diploma or a GED, it makes life seem kind of impossible for somebody who's young. So how is a struggling 15 or 16-year-old kid supposed to survive when you've created a system that tells them since they're not old enough, they can't take advantage of the opportunities that our society has to offer? But on the same token, if they commit a crime or a violent offense, that they can be sent to prison, and in some cases for the rest of their life. Now, I can't even begin to understand how our justice system can even consider sending a 15 or 16-year-old kid to prison when they have so many resources at their disposal. According to the Juvenile Disposition Manual, the court and the state hold sole discretion on the cases in which they order an examination to determine whether the respondent is amenable to treatment. And that reported examination shall include, at a minimum, the following: the respondent's version of the facts, the official version of the facts, the respondent's offense history, an assessment of problems in addition to the alleged deviant behaviors, and the respondent's social, educational, and employment background. But they're only willing to use this discretion when it involves nonviolent sex offenses, when every child is amenable to treatment. And that discretion should be used in every case, whether it's their first offense or it's their fifth offense, whether it's a violent or a nonviolent situation. Because every last one of these juveniles that is in and out of these juvenile facilities and has ended up going to prison has been available, but they refuse to offer them proper help, especially in cases where it's obvious that they are still developing physically, mentally, and emotionally. At this time, I'd just like to invite up just a few young individuals just to give y'all a sense of the type of people that they are allowing to overcrowd our justice system. Among these young men are men serving a life sentence. And they're serving a life sentence for a crime that they committed when they was between the ages of 14 and 15 years old. Also among these young men are decline cases. Cases where they was once again young men sentenced to do adult time for crimes that they committed when they was just juveniles. Now these are all perfect situations and when discretion should have been used and an assessment should have been made and a treatment program and a rehabilitation plan should have been put together. That way the life of the child would have been spared and justice would have been served on terms deemed reasonable by our society. Excuse me for a minute. Because everybody knows that teenagers are immature and irresponsible. And when you combine that with constant drug and alcohol abuse, they tend to be more susceptible to peer pressure and negative influences. And that's what an assessment would have came to realize. And an assessment would have also came to realize that the majority of these kids that they are sending to prison can barely maintain a 9th grade education. And it's not because they refuse to go to school. It's because when they were going to school, they was having a problem learning. So to prevent from being treated like they was dumb, they acted out and became disobedient. And they was labeled as problems instead of children with learning disabilities. And as a society, we tend to spend too much time prejudging situations and basing our decisions off emotions instead of taking the time to seek out the facts that should be considered when the lives of so many children are at stake. Because there's a big difference between a child who was faced with a situation that he's never been faced with before and he makes the wrong decision versus somebody who's a complete danger to our society. And I think that's the main reason why kids never make FBI's most wanted list and why we never see children's faces on America's most wanted. Because I think it'd be pretty hard to convince America that a 15-year-old is threatening the security and the safety of our country. In closing, I'd just like to note that the volunteers and sponsors at the BC does not condone any of the criminal activity that these young men were involved in. Nor are we asking you to overlook them. But what we are asking you is to never lose sight of the fact that we are dealing with children. And that fact in itself should tell us that their potential to be great and successful far outweighs any of the mistakes that they've made in their past. And your focus should be on creating ways to help these young individuals mature out of their phases instead of into them. That's my time.
We can turn the lights back up. Can you hear me? Kind of. We just want to ask for some quick reflections and thoughts about what you just watched, what we all just watched. Did you have a hand up? Great.
I just took a few notes about the root causes that I noticed he was talking about, like the systemic injustice, and to me, what seems like a broken education system. You see this all I've read about this, and I know it because Wyoming is rather poor, and kids are expected to be maintaining their school studies when maybe the situation at home is really bad. And I resonated with what he said, when you're trying to survive, math is not important. And I think that really is a broken education system. that is like easily fixed. Not easily, but can be fixed. Like we can imagine it being fixed, where we teach kids skills about depression and ADD and that sort of thing.
Thank you for that. Do you have other thoughts? I couldn't tell if this was. Yes, please. And then behind you.
For me, coming from the background that I have, I think it can be easy to kind of distance yourself mentally from people in the prison system because, you know, you don't interact with them. You just hear, oh, they commit crimes, and that's why they're there. So I think that it takes really just seeing videos like this and having experiences I've had recently to really humanize people that are in the prison system and realize that they are people that have these different perspectives and different experiences, and they all have needs. It's just powerful.
I just want to say, looking at in a perspective of a high school student and being a black woman in today's day and age, it saddens me to see that these individuals are in the prison system because of the crimes that they did while they were younger. And it just, with the school system itself, it saddens me because the school system should have been teaching them how to not only work with the conditions that they had, whether they had ADD or ADHD or depression, things like that. I feel like the school system should have taught them ways to deal with that and also aided them in getting them support and things that they needed. Also, going back to what he said about math's not important if you're trying to survive out on the street, and English isn't important when you don't have food on the table. In my experiences alone, there have been times that there wasn't food on the table, and yeah, it's been hard. And I completely understand that trying to focus on school while things at home aren't going well is really hard. So, yeah.
Yeah, and what you bring up is really important. I want to make sure we get time to hear from a couple other people as well, but just to share a little bit about who I am coming here. I know Dustin got to share a bit about the work he's doing. My name is Lauren Holtzman, and I graduated recently from Tulane University, and we were asking some of these similar questions about, you know, what we're being taught in our school and what's important and what's valued in our school, and coming together to organize as a group called Students Organizing Against Racism in New Orleans. And asking these questions and thinking about the way that our school is set up to think about poverty and think about the students who are in our school, the teachers that are in our school, the staff in our school, and the whole system and the way that we look at incarceration, education, the way that we are taught about all of these things. So we come to you as thinkers and people who are asking these critical questions as well, and bringing that back to our organizing. So we want to make sure that we have this conversation and thinking about what we want to be doing, bringing people together to be thinking about these questions as well.
That's right. That's right. Any other thoughts from the video?
So I'm on a committee, but I want to say something while I was watching this. I don't need that, girl.
I think it's for the last
I have the benefit of, I'm a counselor at a recovery high school. There's 19 in the country, okay? We have one in Wyoming, in Casper, Wyoming. And we have collaborated with the judicial system, with probation and parole, with the local rehabilitation center, where kids go to for abuse treatment. And what I've found, I'm considered a school counselor, but I actually do clinical therapy every day for addictions, depression, you know, all these issues that we're seeing and that he talked about on the video, and we're able to address that with the students that I get. Systemic problem, who mentioned education up front? Systemic problem in education is that the people that we do have as resources are not trained appropriately. So the people that we have as school counselors are not actually doing counseling. They're doing assessments for standardized testing. So the people that are the people in those resources that should be available to students to do the actual work on depression, ADHD, ADD, all of these issues are not the ones doing the work. So our students are going to these institutions of higher education, and they're not getting the support that they need from the people that are being hired to do that work. So I'm an anomaly in the Natrona County School District because I do clinical therapy every day. Do you see what I'm saying? So what it takes is community activism to go to the school districts and to say, why is my school counselor Sure. Yeah, so you're all very, very right. You're all very, very right. And what the young man said I work with juvenile offenders who are coming to me to recoup from addiction. They're in recovery. They talk recovery every day. They have records already. We're working with the Natrona County Circuit Court so that they can get their records expunged upon successful completion, which is not the usual typical thing.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
I think until we address the basic issues of survival, we're not going to be able to get anywhere with treatment of disabilities. In other words, if a child doesn't have shelter, doesn't have food, doesn't have a safe place to live, he can't learn and he can't fix the problems. Wyoming has some issues with that, as we've seen, when we can't even pass Medicaid to provide health care. So we've got to kind of start at the basis.
Right. And I'm glad you just laid out what you laid out. And not being from Wyoming, I just need to ask y'all some questions. Because I know many of those young men in that video personally. And I can tell you almost to a man in that video, they grew up in poor families. And this is my first time in Laramie. Is poverty a serious issue here? Are there poor people here in Laramie? I need to hear all of y'all, yeah, because I'm going to make sure we're on the same page. And there's poor people throughout the state of Wyoming, correct? Right? Okay. And so how many people in the room either have jobs right now or will have jobs when you're out of school, potentially working with poor people? Raise your hand. How many people right now have jobs working with poor people? Okay. How many people, when you get out of school, might have a job working with poor people? What are you going to do when you get out of school? Are you in college right now? What's your major? Marketing and management. What's your major? Okay. You're in school here? No, where? Colorado State. Okay. Or all Colorado State. So do you live in Denver right now, or? Okay. Are there poor people in that town? All right. Did anybody ever break into a car in your town? Yeah. Have you, right? So I guess I'm asking this question to make sure some way, shape, or form we all have a relationship to poor people. Is that a fair statement? Some way, shape, or form, right? At the very least, we've seen poor people on TV, right? And so I want us to think about this. Let's say, how many people live here in Laramie? What's the minimum wage here? $7.25? Is it $7.25 per hour? So the state is $5.15, but the city of Laramie is $7.25 an hour. Okay. Okay. So then the next question would be, what is the living wage here in Laramie? And when I say living wage, just your basics: shelter, food, transportation, health care. Does anybody know? 11. So it's more than the minimum wage, correct? So is it a fair statement there are people working here, minimum wage jobs, that aren't making enough to make their basic needs met, right? And sometimes people might be working 2 jobs and still aren't getting it if they have children, right? Right? So, and this is a question we should all know. If we say we care about social justice, wherever we live, we ought to know what are the conditions of people who are struggling economically. We ought to know what does it take to live, just the basics. Not talking about even going to the movies, going to a game, going to a show, just the basics of getting by day to day. We all ought to know that. So let's imagine, President Obama was here recently, wasn't he? Well, I know Bernie was here, but the president was here not too long ago, right? I know he came to Laramie because he was trying to go to all 50 states. And so let's say President Obama came back today, came into this room, and heard all of you say that poverty is a serious problem in where you live in Colorado, where you live in Laramie. And he said, I'm going to give you all the money you need to solve poverty where you live, whether it's in Colorado, Laramie. But before I give you the money, I need you to tell me as a president, from a systemic perspective, from a social scientist perspective, why are people poor? And so what I want folks to do, just where you're sitting, maybe groups of 2 or 3, I want you all to think about, from a social scientist, systemic perspective, why are people poor? And we're going to come back and talk about that, okay? Cool? And if you're not sitting next to someone, sit next to someone so you can talk with them. Like having this vision of where I see myself at my best, like just where I'm operating at my best, and just what's inside of me mentally, emotionally, spiritually keeps me from committing to that. Knowing it's a process, it's not a destination, but you know when you're fully in the process. It's like if you're trying to become the best shooter, you know you're putting in the work, and you know you can always get better. But are you put like I asked my name. Okay, we need to come back together. We need to come back together. So I want to hear from each of the groups, and we're going to write up the answers on the board. Then we're going to do another exercise, then we're going to kind of look at what we come up with. So what did y'all talk about? Why are people poor?
So we talked about like privilege and what people are born into and like the opportunities that they can have. Like if they have the opportunity to go to college, get a higher education, go on to like a career, or if they're expected to like not go to college and just work minimum wage jobs to provide for their family.
So lack of opportunity, and we're going to put up minimum, we're going to paraphrase some. Lack of opportunity, minimum wage jobs. Cool? And just give us 1 or 2 that you came up with. Y'all all together?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Let me come right here. What did y'all come up with?
Well, we go to high school in Cheyenne, and we were talking about how we don't have, like, nobody teaches us about money ever. So none of us know how to deal with it. So, like, once we have it, we all just spend it. So that could make people poor, too.
So no education about money, would you say?
Well, from an economic point of view, it's just the economy.
So just the economy?
Yeah, economics, rising population.
Okay, so the way the economy is structured, can you pass it down to me?
We talked about how like there's people that like abuse the system, so then the people that really need help can't get it because there's already too many people using the system.
So people abusing the system? Did you have one more?
I just talked about how another problem could be when people start families when they're not ready for a family, and so then they're struggling. They're just trying to make ends meet with kids and things like that.
Okay. Good. We're going to come back to a lot of these answers. Let me come back here. What'd y'all come up with?
Well, I had the chance to spend a couple of years down in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, and there was a lot of people that I was able to teach as a missionary. And I saw that even though they had the chance to work, they decided not to work. And I was wondering why that is, and it was their houses, they're kind of falling down, they're crumbling and everything like that. I was like, what are you doing? Your floor isn't even finished. And what I figured out is that in general, they were just content with where they were. And so what the problem is, I feel like there's a bunch of racial stereotypes that are here in America too. And some people believe them. They internalize them and they make it so that they don't believe that they can reach those higher perspectives. Okay. And so, yeah, and so my high school, I went to a smaller high school, and it was down in Arizona. It's totally racially mixed. I was the minority down there. There's maybe 5 other Caucasian kids in my class. And so what they did is, instead of pushing, let's graduate high school, they pushed, let's graduate college. And so they made a difference in that our perspective wasn't just to get out of high school, because what can you get with a high school is a minimum wage job. You can't pay the bills with that.
So, but I'm gonna push you, because we got to get a lot of people. For the sake of the board, why are people poor?
It's because of their own beliefs that they put on themselves.
So belief systems on themselves. Okay, we're gonna come back to this. You wanna say something?
Well, I still would go back to, we need to take care of basic needs, and we're not doing that in Wyoming.
So,
food, shelter, and help to get a good job.
So government not taking, let me just paraphrase, government, for the sake of the conversation. Why are people poor? No? What y'all have?
We basically talked about like how it's just basically I already mentioned before, just unequal opportunities.
Unequal opportunities?
And oppression.
Oppression?
Yeah, we
okay.
talked a lot about the Homestead Act and how didn't let a lot of people have the same opportunities as others.
So you're going to a good school. The Homestead Act. I love it. I love it. So, here, why are people poor?
I would say unequal distribution of resources, and healthcare is set up so that people don't get care until they're already sick.
Okay. So unequal distribution of resources and the way the healthcare system is set up. What did y'all talk about over here? Just one or two. Here you go. Just one or two.
Well, one that I just kind of added listening to everyone in the room, I think in Wyoming we have this kind of pervasive culture in which we have this cowboy up or pull yourself up by your own bootstraps kind of mentality. So I think there's a lack of empathy as a result of that. I think our people in government positions refuse to see it and would like to blind themselves from it.
Great, thank you. Was there any right in here that didn't get mentioned you want to mention real quick?
We talked about the things listed, but we also talked about addiction to, yeah, like substances.
Great, thank you. Y'all have anyone?
Sure.
Just one.
The survival thinking is short-term thinking, and so when people are blamed for bad choices, those choices are made on short-term survival thinking rather than long-term planning, because they're not afforded that luxury.
Okay, cool. And we're going to come back and we're going to debrief and look at some of the answers. But let's President left, and it's, what day of the week is this? This is Friday? So okay, it's Friday. Let's say at the end of the conference, you're kind of tired from the conference, and whether you're staying in a hotel or you're going back to your dorm or where you live, and you just want, what's a grocery store here in town? Safeway. All right, Walmart. Everybody knows Walmart. So you run to the Walmart grocery store, and you just want to pick up a few things for your night, maybe some Ben & Jerry's, some juice, just a couple things. And so you get your stuff, and you know how they have that checkout line where it's 15 only, right? And you're about 30 feet away and nobody's there, and you're happy because you're going to be able to get out quickly, right? And as you're getting closer to that line, a woman with a shopping cart jumps in front of you. And she has a shopping cart filled up with all kinds of stuff: Doritos, frozen food, ice cream, soda, steaks, lobster tail. And she got a couple kids with her who are running around, pulling stuff off of the racks, and she's trying to keep control of the kids. And just because you just came from a social justice conference, so you're like, all right, cool, whatever. And even though the line says 15 only, she's got about 150 things in her basket. And you see the cashier is looking really annoyed at this. But, whatever. So you're standing there kind of reflecting on the day. And as you're standing there, a couple gets in line behind you, and you notice they only have a few things as well. And you can kind of see them watching this scenario. And you know how you can pick up the vibe that somebody is talking about somebody? You start to see them talking about this woman. And as she finally goes to pay, she takes out what used to be called food stamps. But they're not food stamps anymore. What are they now here in Wyoming? Do you still use it? You don't have an electronic card? But it's okay. So the electronic food stamps, right? Same thing in Colorado. Same thing everywhere across the country. And so she's swiping that electronic food stamps, and the machine's not working. The cashier's banging it. Now you hear this couple really talking about this woman. What do you think this couple's saying about why this woman's poor? Now, I want to preface this, as we preface it with the Freedom School, is we want to keep it real. What do you think this couple is saying about why this woman's poor? In the back. She doesn't deserve it, and she's using it to her advantage. What else? Yes. She's lazy, and she doesn't want to work. What else? Yes. She's stealing their tax money. What else in the back? She's not responsible for her kids. She's a bad mom, right? What else? Who had a hand up? Yes. She's using the kids to get more money. Why is she buying all? I can't afford all that nice stuff, right? That's right. That's right. What else? What else are they saying? I want y'all to think about it. Good. That she had kids and she couldn't afford them, right? And they're commenting on how many kids she had. And if they're commenting on how many kids she had, there's an underlying assumption they're making about her character. What are they saying about her character? Just say it. Is that what we really say? If we're not, here, stand up with me. Stand up with me. What's your name? Jackie. Oh, Jackie, we're together. Oh, Jackie, honey. She's just a little promiscuous. That's not what we would say, is it? Right? If we're going to keep it real, we would say some ugly things, right? Right? So you can sit down, Jackie. Right? So there's words that people would use, right? We know that, right? What else? That she's trash. Okay? She's a welfare queen. Yes. She's a freeloader. Okay? Anything else? Anything else? She's irresponsible. Bad mom. Making poor food choices, right? Okay, anything else? It would depend on her race. So what do you mean? So racialized comments. Okay, good, good. So Lauren's going to take us through looking at these two lists around why are people poor. But one of the things I want to highlight is in our previous session, we talked about socialization and conditioning. And as we set up the first list, really asked the room to think from a systemic perspective, from a social scientist perspective. But our conditioning around poverty is so deep that we got a lot of things on the first list that weren't necessarily systemic or about society. And we're going to look at that, okay?
Okay, so Dustin just said that we have a lot of stuff on this list. We said we were going to talk about systems, right? What do you think, if this is a more systemic kind of discussion of why people are poor, what do you think some of the differences are between what we have on this blue side and the red side? So unequal distribution of resources, born into poverty, lack of opportunity, minimum wage jobs, lack of education, the way the healthcare system is set up, in comparison to she doesn't deserve things, she's lazy, doesn't want to work, taking advantage of the system, bad mom, bad choices. What do you think some of the differences are? Yes. That's key, responsibility. So over here, we might have some type of responsibility in this, and over here, we're blaming the victim or an individual. Can you say more about that? I see you shaking your head. What do you think some of the differences are between the lists? We have root causes on the left and
Push the button on the bottom, make sure.
So the left are root causes and the right are, yeah, just kind of what society, what people hear from other people, so they're just,
Right, so we have, that was really loud. So we have some root causes over here, and here are some things that we hear from other people. We're looking at individuals and responsibility. Yes.
Well, I was just going to say that at our school we have this program called SSA, and I'm like a huge advocate in it. And one of the things we learn is that you can't really judge somebody till you've walked in their shoes. And like the stuff on like the left is like when we're not actually judging them, because like we kind of per se like know their story or kind of know what they've been through. And like the right is just like from an outsider standpoint.
So we have there's some reasoning behind it that might make sense.
Yeah, and of course, going off what she said, because we go to the same school, we're in the same program, and I want to reflect off of that. Yeah, we learned that it's hard to judge somebody when you know their story, and looking at the blue side of that, we're looking at that person. We've sat down, we've talked to that person, we know what they're going through, we know their story. On the red side of that, we don't know that person. We're just meeting them for the first time, and we're judging them based on how we feel about them. So
there's some judgment in there. Which side do you think was easier to name? The red? It was easy, even though, so this has more of a story to it. It might seem a little bit more complicated or complex. We're looking at a bigger picture, some systems and institutions, and these are some of the things that we've heard more that just come easier to us, right? Because we were talking about the couple behind us, but it was pretty easy for us to name. I mean, there was one point where it was just like, got to get them all down, right? Like this was a little bit more of a struggle for us to come out with what are some of the systemic reasons why people are poor, as opposed to what we've been so socialized and conditioned and trained to believe about poor people, right? So if we're thinking about this and we're thinking about systems and institutions about why people are poor, and then we're looking at individuals, how do you think that we typically as a society address poverty? Do you think we look at it from an institutional perspective or an individual? Yeah.
When you think about that question, think about policymakers who are designing policies for poor people. Politicians, when they're talking about poor people, what side of this are they most likely coming from?
Yeah, you had your hand up.
I think they're coming from the right side. It's easier to blame people for it, not actually find a solution to the problem or look at it as like a societal problem rather than just their own.
Do you have an example of that? Think about it. Keep thinking about it.
Yeah, we have a lot of hands. Did you have your hand up before too? I might have made that up. Holding that. Okay. Yes.
Well, I think what's missing with our policymakers is a narrative. We watched a video today that I think allowed for us to write the list in blue. It gave us an immediate reflection piece. The red, we were provided a scenario, and had that woman been in front of us providing her own narrative, I'm thinking it would have been a little bit different. So I challenge our policymakers to go out and seek out those narratives, because I think it would allow them to move back into a healthier place that recognizes the red but works with the blue to make it make change happens.
Most often they're on the red side.
I think they're on the red because they're not hearing the negative or the narrative. They are stuck within the system and the policy that lives within that system.
I think we have a hand back there, and I want to come back over here.
I was just saying they're mainly on the red because you see politicians all the time, and they're like, oh, they're lazy, they're immigrants, they're stealing all of our welfare, and it gets so repetitive, and people don't really see past the red at that point because it's being drilled into our heads.
I think we had a hand over here and one over here. Yes.
I think it has a lot to do that, like, a lot of the politicians have never experienced what it's like to be poor. they don't know like what the poor people actually go through. So they're going off of their own experiences. And they're like, they don't understand like what it takes, so they don't really get it, so they go more off the red because that's what their experiences tell them.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, we bring this workshop all over the country, and we have lots of people who are in the room, and I'm sure that some people who are in this room might identify as being poor, or if your parents didn't pay for college, or you missed your next paycheck, right? But it's still really easy for us to come up with this side of the list, right? Like we were doing this work in at a homeless shelter, and as soon as we ask the question, why are people poor? This is the list that people come up with, right? So when we think about how we've all been socialized, have we been socialized to think of wealthy people as lazy? Or have we been socialized to think of wealthy people as lazy? Or people who have money as not wanting to work? Or taking advantage of the system? Or stealing our tax dollars and being bad moms? But are there wealthy people who are lazy? And who are taking advantage of the system? Big bailout tax dollars that we're paying for, right? And not always the best parents, is that right? But for some reason, when we talk about wealthy people, or how we've been socialized and conditioned to think about people who have money and resources and access, we don't think about this side of the list, right? Yes, I wanted to make sure that you get, when you have a chance, when you're done writing.
What I wanted to say was just following up with the young lady over here. I think our politicians do have their own agenda, and this is not a very popular thing to say, but I think it has a lot to do with the belief that God helps those who help themselves, sort of thing, and where a lot of our policies, I study policy in the economics department, a lot of policies are backed up with a Christian agenda, and it's so detrimental, I can't even tell you. That's what our country is founded on too. Manifest destiny just sweeping the nation, and it hasn't stopped.
That's right, and there's a whole history with that, right? So let me ask you a question. How many people in here, did you want to say something before we keep going?
I believe that when you were talking about, when we look at wealthy people, something that we don't look at, we automatically assume that wealthy people are educated. I mean, that's something that I personally believe, that if you're wealthy, you're educated. And sometimes it doesn't seem that way. And when people look at poor people, they see that they're not educated, that they're lazy, that they're worthless, and they don't work. And that's sometimes not always the case. And so I feel that the education system and education itself is also a problem and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's so key, because for some reason we're taught to think in this country that anyone can work with poor people, right? And anyone can really work with poor people. We have access to communities that are poor, and we are able to put programs into all these communities and think that we know, right, how we can deal with this community. How many people are working with poor people? I know Dustin asked this question, but how many people are in a position, a job where you interact with poor people in some capacity? Or you're on a campus where there are poor people on the campus? Well, I will tell you that no matter where you are, there are poor people on college campuses everywhere. Whether they're working on your campus or they're going to school there are poor people on the campus, and that's something for us to really think about and question about how we've been socialized about who goes to school, right? And also thinking about our miseducation too, for those of us who are able to go to school. But for some reason, we're taught that we can work with poor people, and we create programs, whether we're policymakers or we're people who are just volunteering or working at a nonprofit, to work with poor people. What's one of those programs that's for people who are lazy? What's a volunteer program? Yes. What? A shelter? A shelter for people who are lazy? Have you ever heard of Job One, or programs to help people work? Workforce? What about for people who have too many kids, if that's even a thing? Might not be as popular in Wyoming.
if that red side of the list is we're all conditioned to think that stuff, no matter how progressive we are, no matter for us doing this work all the time, every single one of us have received messages from our religion, from the media, from our education system, that poor people are fundamentally poor because something's wrong with them. None of us are immune from that messaging in this society. Now, some of us have gone on a journey where we begin to internalize that blue side of the list, but I can tell you, I could be in that grocery store, and I've been in it recently, where those things will pop in my mind. That's just the reality. Now, I have to do work to get that back out. But when we think about if we've all been conditioned in this society on that red side of the list, then we get jobs when we graduate college, and we're designing programs or implementing policies for poor people. Often, we're implementing them from the red side of the list. So as Lauren asked a question, we could go through every single thing on the red side of the list and find a program. For promiscuous women, we have parenting classes, right? Or for bad moms, parenting classes. For promiscuous women, we have teen pregnancy classes. For lazy people, we have work first, job training. We could go through every single one of these. But we would be hard-pressed to find some programs that are about looking at the structure of capitalism in the United States. We're going to be hard to get funded to do a lot of this blue side of the list. And so we have got to be clear that even as we get jobs, and many of you will have jobs working with poor people, where are you coming from? Do you think there are teachers in schools in the United States that are teaching poor children and thinking some of this about those children and their families?
Yeah.
Do you think there are police officers working in poor communities that are thinking some of this about that community? That they're lazy, they're no good people? How might that impact how they do their work? If you've internalized this and you're working with poor people, how might that impact how you would police a community, how you would educate a community, how you would give therapy to a community? How might that impact the service you deliver? Yes.
I think that when you have some kind of personal story to go along with it, that then it becomes easier to help people out. Like, for example, if you decided you were going to be a police officer in a poor community and you knew all these things, but you also knew that the people were trying their best and they just wanted help, then you would want to give them that help without making them feel bad about themselves.
But what if you didn't have that blue side? What if you just internalized? What if you never sat in a workshop like this, never took a class around looking at systemic poverty, but you watched TV your whole life, you went to church like the sister here said your whole life, and you were taught that people are poor because they're lazy, they don't want to work, they're just abusing the system. How might that impact how you treat people in that community?
You wouldn't treat them as well as you would treat somebody that you see as an equal to yourself.
That's right. Say it out.
You're going to treat them poorly. That's just what it is. There's no sugarcoating it. There's nothing. You're going to treat them how you feel that they should be treated. Yeah, less than equal, exactly. You're going to treat them poorly. You're going to treat them how you see them, and you won't see a problem with it.
And we can take that further. If you were a teacher, you might relate to them in that way, right? So just quickly again, show of hands, people who work with poor people. Put them up really high, really high. Okay, for all of y'all who got jobs right now working with poor people, some way, shape, or form, you're paying your bills because poor people exist. How many of you were asked, why are people poor when you got your jobs working with poor people? Not a hand. Now, if we understand that we've all been conditioned on this red side of the list, what is problematic about us not asking any of you getting your jobs working with poor people, why are people poor? Might that be a relevant question? If you're getting a job working with poor people, might that be a relevant question? Because basically, what we're saying in this society is you can think whatever you want about poor people. We don't care what you think. And we know we're all been conditioned to think that way. That's the value we have on poor people. Now, we know in Seattle, because we do this workshop so much, people are starting to ask people, why are people poor in their interviews? You would have to be an idiot to come in and say, because they're lazy, promiscuous, hoes, and crackheads, and all that stuff, right? But the reality is, if we have our jobs working with poor people, we ought to have ongoing conversations looking at the blue side and then really looking at our work. And is our work on the red side? Are we trying to fix broken individuals? Or are we trying to fix systems that are creating poor people?
So that's a big thing to take in, right? And how we do our work, how we even think about social justice, right? Because even the way that we think about social justice, we could be looking at individuals, or we could look at how systems are set up and how we address different issues of social justice and how we try to work with individuals who are having individual experiences in classes, wherever we are. Or we can look at what is the system that set that up for that individual to be in the place that they're in. So we think that if we're going to talk about social justice, we need to make sure that we're not just looking at individuals, but we're looking at our systems and our institutions and how we all play into how this plays out and how we can so quickly, like, you know, just on a bad day, that's when it happens usually, right? When you're tired or whatever else is going on, we revert back to this because this is what we've been socialized to understand and how to see people in the world. So we hope that, I don't know if Dustin, if you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, just maybe, just a last thought that I would leave, because we're out of time right now. But the answer that always comes up with that grocery store scenario is they're lazy. But when I think about, I know so many poor people that are working 2 jobs, that are working their butts off to survive, but the way the system is set up, they're not making it. And I know if we go, it's interesting, like when I was coming up, when you would go to fast food restaurants, you would see teenagers working there. Now I'm seeing people who are 50 and 60 years old working at Burger King or McDonald's. But when we want to start looking at why people are struggling economically, we want to say something's wrong with them. And we're just asking you to consider that there's something else going on. And we're not saying that there's never anybody that's not lazy or any of these things. But as Lauren said, we don't put those values on wealthy people. We just apply those values to poor people. And so again, we're asking us to think more critically and to ask the deeper questions. And we thank you all for your energy and your time. We wish we had all day, but we don't. So God bless you.
You want to go give it to her?